Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Kaghas-Chan. I am the Managing Director of Ignite House of Innovation. And with us today is my colleague, Carlo Quintanar, who will co-host for the show, as well as our Ignite founder, Andre Yap, who is also here. And we will be introducing a special guest later on. But just to give a context of what our topic is all about, which is great expectations, I would like to share a little bit of a story of how this all started. But before that, I would like to say thank you for being with us today, for having the time to show up in our webcast. Actually, back in 2016, I learned about this concept of AQ and grit. I actually found this morning in one of my bubbles. Okay. This has helped me a lot, especially at this time of Corona, that I am alone in my house. Um, and the idea of uh, going online, sharing about this with you guys, with your colleagues and with your families. Um, Here, it's still with me, the concept of AQ and grit, what it's all about. We're gonna talk about that later. And then actually, I was one of the lucky people who have met the founder of AQ and Grit, who actually conceptualized that. I met him back in 2016. He wrote down for your ascent. And I wrote down here before, are you a quitter? Are you a camper? Are you a climber? So later on, we're going to learn more about that. And actually, I would love to already introduce an ex-colleague of mine. He's a really good friend also, who is representing Viventis Search Asia as to propagating this theory and this great concept of AQ and grit, which is used globally, especially in the universities like Harvard or like MIT or Stanford. They have selected this specific program in order to help founders, businessmen, entrepreneurs, and even employees who are working for organizations. So I would like to give the floor to James Hargrove. James?
Hi, guys, and thank you everyone for joining. Glad to have you on board for today's topic.
Yeah, for the benefit of our audiences, can you tell us more about your background and what do you do specifically?
Sure. Well, as you heard from Grax, I work for Viventis Search Asia. I'm their training resource lead for their training and development team. I've been here in the Philippines for just over 12 years now, married to a Filipina. Love it. And I guess not to give you my life story, but a quick snapshot and a brief explanation of how I came to be in front of you today. Upon finishing high school, I immediately joined the military. I served 6 years in the U.S. Army. Went in as an infantryman, eventually became what they call special operations. I spent a majority of those 6 years in the Middle East during the Gulf War, Desert Storm, Desert Shield. I joined the military so that the government would pay for my schooling. My first degree is in zoology. I'm a zoologist first and foremost. So my roots are in the sciences, the hard sciences, which we'll talk about today. Not zoology, but neuroscience, maybe a bit, depending on the questions and how it links to AQ and grit. But unfortunately, when I finished that program, that course, there were no jobs in the industry I wanted to be in, which was to be an animal trainer. And the joke that I always share is, well, I'm kind of an animal trainer now, but now my animals are Homo sapiens sapiens or humans. But at that time, there were no jobs as animal trainers, so I had to go back to school. I pursued a second course, completely unrelated, known as digital media or graphic and web design. Worked in that industry for about 6 years before coming here to the Philippines. Once I came here to the Philippines, I got offered a job training communications. I worked for numerous BPOs, call centers, as you would imagine, helping them enhance their agents' proficiency, their fluency in English. I did that for about 7 years. And then I discovered AQ and Grit, which is just over 5 years ago. One of the books that Grax just flashed, plus the other resource that Dr. Stoltz authored called Grit, I read those books, and not to sound like I'm trying to sell the product or anything, but those books changed my life. Once I read it, I saw not only the science behind today's topics, but I saw how relevant it was. I went through the Grit book, read almost like an activity book or an instructional book, and I took it to heart. I actually applied the concepts there. I also assessed myself. We have 2 online assessments, the AQ profile and the grit gauge, which can accurately and reliably measure a person's AQ and grit. So I put myself through those assessments, and to my dismay, my scores were average. Now, I had high expectations of myself. I said, average, how could I be average? I mean, I'm an ex-soldier, I'm an ex-athlete, and, I'm a gritty person. And I pushed back against the results at that time. But once I immersed myself in those concepts, I read the books, I became a certified trainer under Dr. Stoltz in Peak Learning. And once I really understood what AQ and grit was, I came to the sobering realization that, maybe I am just average. And then I wanted to make a change, make a difference, and improve both my AQ and grit. And ever since, this has been my passion, and it's likely to continue indefinitely.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that, James. For today, before we wrap up in the next 60 minutes, I want to actually learn about what is AQ and grit, why do we need it, especially in the COVID adversity, and who needs it so that we can apply it in their lives, and how are we able to do it? So, Carlo?
Yeah, thanks, Drax. So as we said, today James is here to highlight 2 particular skills which are important not only for businesses and employees, but for everyone, especially this time that we are facing a common enemy, which is called COVID-19. And these 2 skills, as mentioned earlier, are AQ, or Adversity Quotient, and Grit. So James, let's start with AQ. Now we've heard of IQ, we've heard of EQ. How is AQ different from those 2? Or are they the same?
Okay, very good. Good, excellent question. Let's start with the similarities, the obvious similarity. They all have the word quotient in their title, which means that these concepts are measurable to varying degrees. IQ, cognitive ability, EQ, emotional intelligence. Well, AQ, or adversity response, how we respond to life's tough stuff, is also something we can measure quite accurately. Now, how do they differ? Well, all 3 are important. It's important to know what level of cognitive strength you have. It's also important to know your level of empathy, your ability to understand and recognize your emotional states. But the question is, what happens when lightning strikes, when the ground falls out beneath you? Are you able to think clearly? Is your IQ going to help you in those situations? How does your emotional state resist or withstand these calamities, adversities, atrocities that enter our lives? Well, the answer to those questions is your AQ, how we respond to adversity.
Cool.
I see.
So grit is actually an acronym, right? So can you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I answer the question, let me just quickly kind of combine the 2 terms we're talking about today, AQ and grit. If you put these 2 terms together, it equals a very popular word that we hear all the time, mindset. The problem with the word mindset is people can't define it. They can give you synonyms for it. They can say, well, I know it's positive, I hear it all the time, but they can't articulate the definition. So real quickly, let's define mindset, or how we define it. Mindset is divided into 2 facets, your defense and your offense. AQ, or how we respond to adversity, would be the defensive part of our mindset, which is, of course, super important. The other half of that concept, mindset, is grit, or your ability to goal set, goal complete. It's about establishing clear and compelling goals and being able to go for them in the best ways possible. You can almost think of it like AQ is your shield and grit is your sword, your weapon of choice. You put those together, that's mindset. Now, going to Grax's question, that term grit, we hear that also all the time. Well, the general use of the word is resilience, tenacity, hard work, that that putting all your soul into something in order to achieve something. Well, for us, grit is also an acronym. Each of the 4 letters represents one of 4 dimensions, namely growth, resilience, instinct, and tenacity. You put those 4 together, that allows us to not just understand and define the word grit, but it also helps us measure this based on those assessments that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's fantastic, James. So, of course, it's great. We've heard about AQ now and grit, especially from your perspective. Now, as you know, we're all facing a global crisis, and you're here in the Philippines with us, right? So
Oh
now we're
yeah,
facing a global pandemic. So you said we have a shield, we have our sword. How can we use AQ and grit now to help ourselves now that we're in these difficult times?
absolutely. Well, as everyone here knows and is experiencing, I would say it's near unprecedented. I mean, we've had scares like this in the past with SARS and Asian bird flu and things of that nature. But the level of quarantine that we're experiencing right now, yes, is a super big challenge. Obviously, many industries are shut down or working at their bare minimum capacity. Most of us are working from home, including myself and my team, who's also joining us here in the call. And yeah, this is a big challenge. But this is the times where AQ and grit are the most relevant. How are we responding to this disruption in our careers and our lives and things of that nature? And 2, have you forgotten, abandoned, or simply re-diverted your energy toward different goals at this time? So when we talk about AQ and grit or mindset, this is not something that's genetic, something we're born with. This is something that we develop, nurture, grow, and possibly even lose over time. But it takes effort. I mean, a lot of it. So the question you should ask yourself first is, okay, considering what's happening right now with the COVID, with the quarantine, with this whole work from home or not working at all, how am I responding to this? What perceived level of influence do I feel I have on this situation? Am I doing anything to step up to make an immediate positive difference? What is the downside? What are the upsides potentially to this adversity? And finally, when can I expect this adversity to be over reasonably? And what do I want life to look like at the end or beyond this current adversity? Try answering these questions to yourself as honestly as you can. And as you do, you might have what we call an aha moment. I'd also like to take you back to the second question I just posed. What are the potential downsides, which are quite obvious, and what are the potential upsides to this situation? Now, considering what's happening, you might think, well, my goodness, upside? What upsides could there be for me or my organization? Well, let's go through a few personal benefits that I've noticed in the current environment we're existing in. Number 1, less traffic, less industry pollution. For the first time in the 12 years that I've lived in Manila, I heard birds chirping this morning. Now, not to say they're not always chirping, but because of all the sound, the hustle and bustle of the city, the traffic, the horns, the people, nature, something I've always taken for granted. I only hear it when I go to the province. When I look out my balcony or outside my balcony, the skies are clear. It almost feels like I'm in the province. That would be a benefit. More time with your family, including your pets. Don't forget them. They're probably ecstatic that you're home all the time. Your dogs, cats, or chinchillas, right? Also, I have more time to pursue the things I've always put off. You could do the same. Look at all this time you have, like reading, meditating, yes, exercising, which you can do in your unit. Be creative, go to YouTube, look for resources, look for ways to improve new skills, look for home improvement projects, things you've always put off or put aside and said, you know, I just don't have the time to do it. Well, now you do. Also, during this time, it allows us to practice our resourcefulness, whether it's with your food, supplies, because as you know, going to the supermarket right now to buy groceries, that in itself is a challenge. So considering this is probably going to last for at least a couple of more weeks, Allow yourself to feel, gauge, how are you being resourceful in this time of crisis? Are there ways to improve this? The answer is probably, of course. Now, let's flip that over to your organization. What things can your company do during this time of crisis? Well, considering most companies don't offer work from home or don't consider it, well, now they're kind of forced to become more innovative, to think of ways, not just to work from home, but to also maintain employee engagement, productivity, making sure your clients know you're still there. This is also a great opportunity for companies to exercise CSR initiatives. Reach out to your clients, not to sell or to make offers to them. Find out how they're doing. How are their families doing? How are the organizations doing? Build empathy. Show them that you have a reputation for serviceable actions during this time of crisis. Also, use this as a chance to upskill your workforce. There are tons of online learning platforms that you can expose your teams to. So while they're working at home, possibly, hopefully being productive, they can also do things to upskill or uplevel themselves. And finally, what about all this time you have to enhance, improve, change your year-long strategies? Engage, challenge your leaders in your organization to rethink what opportunities lie beyond this crisis. Obviously, this is not going to last forever. So take this downtime to reflect. Reflect upon what you've already accomplished this year, albeit first quarter, and what other things could you harness, grasp, and promote throughout the rest of this 2020?
Well, thank you so much, James, for answering our next question, because we have been thinking about how can we apply this in our businesses, in our work from home setup right now. If you are an employee, or if you are a business leader, or if you are a business owner, for that matter, what are the ways in which you can apply it in your daily lives and in your daily routines? Because, of course, it has disrupted all our routines, right? So,
Grax.
go ahead, Andre.
Go ahead, Andre.
Hello, hi, James. Good to see you
Hi,
again.
Andre. Hey, great to see you also.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I want to jump in on Grax's question just now, but kind of
Sure.
fast forward it in a way, which is to say, putting ourselves in the positions of leaders, business owners right now. I'm sure you've met and managed a few hundreds of them over the years that you've been doing grit and AQ, through their organizations. Do you have instances where people have reached out to you that you've delivered these to, and give us a sense of practically boots on the ground examples of how they're dealing with or how they're applying grit and AQ in this time of crisis?
All right, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, several of our existing / past clients have reached out to me directly. Those who have underwent our programs, whatever track they may have availed of. And one of the tools that we exercise in our programs, one of our more popular ones, is called the Gritty Game Plan. Now, it's a very simple but compelling activity where the participants identify their most compelling goal, singular, the biggest thing they could ever hope to achieve in this context, their organization. And then they develop what we call an action plan around those 4 dimensions that I mentioned earlier: growth, resilience, instinct, and tenacity. And then they start building or populating their plans so that they can not only stay in line, but they will greatly increase their probability of achieving said goal. Now, as these clients reach out to me, they go, James, as you know, this is devastating to our business. How are we ever going to go past this? How are we going to motivate, inspire our teams to continue to put out the level of effort that they've been putting out before this crisis? And I say, okay, let's first pause, take a deep breath. Let's go back to your game plan. Let's reflect on those questions deeply. And real quick, real fast, I'll go through the questions. Starting with growth, your effort-based mindset. Looking at, choose a goal. Like I mentioned earlier, your grittiest goal or your gnarliest goal. And think, okay, What alternative angles, approaches, and insights must I consider to help better get to that goal, considering what's happening around us? Then we think about resilience, our adversity response. What are the 2 or 3 most pressing or obvious challenges or obstacles that are preventing us from achieving this organizational goal? And how could we respond better to each one of these? Third, instinct. We also call instinct your goal compass, or how are you navigating toward this goal? Are you on the most optimal path? Or do you need to step back, reassess, and reroute, and consider plan B or even plan C? During times of crisis, contingency plans are paramount. When I was in the military, we used to have several layers of contingencies when we were in combat settings, because as you know, in those environments, things don't always work out accordingly. Same thing for your organization. Just because you have a plan in action right now doesn't mean it's going to work. You got to have that plan B or plan C. And finally, tenacity, your relentless pursuit of that goal. What is one specific action that you, your team, your leaders can take if their battle cry is, we refuse to quit? We refuse to submit to the situation, this whole COVID pandemic. You keep those questions beside you or in front of you and continually work your answers, refine your answers to these questions as it aligns to that goal. This is probably one of the simplest yet strongest ways to keep that offense, that sword, that weapon, your grit aligned in this time of crisis.
Thank you, James. Maybe by way of a concrete example, I wonder if we could do a different kind of repartee here.
Sure.
I'm respecting that in many cases your client stories might be confidential, right?
Sure.
But I think in a time of, particularly with a topic as frameworky as grit and AQ, we really need to get this down to, what's happening on. Give me examples, right? And
Sure.
so I will offer up stories for better or for worse that come from my team. And maybe you can come back and deconstruct, okay, this is the instinct part manifesting itself. Oh, that's the tenacity part manifesting itself. Or you could have exercised tenacity this way, given the situation. Shall we do that?
Sure. Sounds like a plan. Love it.
So let's, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be very experimental between James and I, so let's see. But I really wanted to give the audience a boots on the ground. How does grit happen when the rubber meets the road and stuff hits the fan? Okay,
Yep.
So let me start this story, right, by saying that 2 Wednesdays ago, I took the whole team, about 30 of us, to Tali Beach in Batangas, and we were supposed to go for a 3-day strategic planning, quarterly business review, the first quarter being over. And I remember at that time, my mind frame was, I'm about to go out on vacation for all of April. So this is my sort of last hurrah with the team, make sure we're geared up for Q2. So what's our plan, etc. So we spent day 1 doing our strategic planning, and that went very well. So that was Wednesday, right? And if you are able to situate the story, Thursday was when President Duterte came out with the decree saying we are going to go on a lockdown, on quarantine, which eventually then became a few days later the enhanced quarantine. So we were there on a Wednesday feeling pretty good about ourselves, soaking up the sunshine and the beach and each other's great company, looking forward to Thursday. As I went to bed that night, it occurred to me that we live in a very different world, and I sort of foresaw what was going to come, what was coming in terms of the pandemic coming to the Philippines and really disrupting life. So Thursday morning, 9 a.m., when we first started our first session, I said to the team, okay, we were supposed to turn the strategic plan from Wednesday into now action plans and KPIs for Q2, all of today. But we're not going to do any of that because the pandemic is coming to Manila. Our audiences, our market has always been business leaders and corporations. We have got to spend today, Thursday, figuring out how you, and I, the whole team, is going to stay relevant to our people, to our customers, to our market. So we did that rapidly, and by 4 p.m. that day, we had a very clear plan and a very clear timeline about what we were going to do, which is we asked ourselves the first question of who do we need to serve in this time of crisis? Who's going to be most affected? Who is relevant to our skill sets, to our capabilities? And we said those are the top 3 rungs of an organization: the CEOs, the executive committees that report to them, and the 1 or 2 downs. And we need to equip these people to deal with 3 things in particular: be able to refocus their teams, be able to reorganize their teams. Focus is one thing. Organization when you are unable to go to work. And this was before the announcement, right? And then third, we needed to very specifically be able to have them launch business solutions in days, right? Something that we understood was in many ways beyond the capabilities of most organizations, especially big organizations. So we did that by day 2. By Friday when we woke up, oh, by the way, so last 30 seconds of the story, and then you can reconstruct.
Sure.
Last Thursday evening, we had a clear plan. And we said, I always say the best for last with the team. I said, we got to get this done in 10 days. We got to launch these solutions in 10 days. By Friday morning, day 3, I had changed my mind. I realized we do not have 10 days. 10 days would have brought us to today, more or less. I said then we have 5 days. And then I cheated the team and I said Wednesday. That was a Friday. Wednesday, we're going to launch this product. That was last Wednesday. We launched closer to Thursday, Friday. So the 3 days took us 5 days. That 1 solution became 4 solutions as of now. And you are part of one of those solutions. One of the solutions being, hey, 30 days don't have to be a lockdown of gone to waste. 30 days can be a period of transformation and growth with guests and experts like you, if we can only spend the time. So that's sort of the ongoing story of how we're keeping ourselves relevant and here to serve. So if you could take that story and maybe deconstruct what about it was G, what about it was R, I, T, and what about it displayed AQ, etc.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad to hear that you and your team were able to achieve that. That was a shining example of grit. But not necessarily in the GRIT order. In fact, what I heard was an IGRT order, or instinct. Immediately, your team said, or you said to your team, hey, we have to switch gears. We have to realign our priorities, considering what's happening right now. That's the instinct. That's that whole reassessing and rerouting appropriately. Then you did the growth, which was, okay, let's decide what are the most important questions we need to ask ourselves right now. Namely, what do our clients need most? And those 3 other questions that you pose afterwards. So that all falls into the realm of your growth or effort-based mindset. And then resilience. What barriers outside or in addition to the COVID, what other barriers might we also experience as we switch gears and pursue this new goal? Again, that's resilience. And finally, tenacity. That whole turning the timeline on its head from 10 days to 5 days and maybe even a little shorter. That is tenacity at its finest. That's saying, okay, not just not giving up, but how do we maintain our momentum, keep the dream alive, yet do so in a shorter time frame? Now, to anyone who might suffer from lower tenacity, when they heard you say that, they probably panicked inside. People with high tenacity, they embrace that. They say, yeah, bring it on. They bite down on their mouthpieces and they go in swinging. Now, if you put all 4 of those dimensions together and you were to measure someone to see where on that spectrum they lie across those 4 dimensions, you would be able to grit gauge, how likely their response will be to all 4 of those stages.
So one last shot, guys. The Well, thanks for reorganizing them. I really thought so. Instinct first, IGRT. My question now is: do you measure a clearly you measure an individual for grit? I suppose it's the same measure if you're applying it to a team.
Yep.
Yeah. I just do want to point out to back up your point that the display of grit, if you will, that we were able to manifest, and that humbly and at the same time proudly, we will continue. I will say we will continue without failure to keep manifesting. Is not something that turned up in Tally Beach all of a sudden. It was. I remember my exact words on Thursday morning. We've been practicing for this all our life. This is not a drill. This is not a drill. And so the notion about grit and adversity and G and R and I and T being, it's not a magic formula. It's something like being great at basketball or piano. You have to practice it, right? Yep. So can you give us a little bit of a window as to how you practice G, R, I, and T?
Absolutely. Now, we in our workshops, we have dozens of different tools or things that you can do to promote both AQ and grit. So considering what's happening right now, this adversity that we're experiencing, the pandemic, the quarantine, let me just quickly share something that we call the adversity continuum, or how do we respond to adversity? What is this hardwired pattern of response that we all possess internally? There are 5 stages to the adversity continuum. Going from the worst possible response to the best possible response, we have first, avoiding, or pretending the adversity is not even happening, or it doesn't have any effect on us or on our lives. It's the whole denial strategy. Absolutely the worst thing you could possibly do in a time of adversity, because if you try, you're going to lose. Second, we have what we call surviving. Whether it's figuratively or literally, this crisis, it's celebrating the fact that you're still standing once the smoke clears. A little better than avoiding, but still not optimal. Third, we have a word that all of us have heard and we possibly hold in high regard. It's called coping. Now, when we hear the word coping, we think, yeah, that's the ideal response to adversity. Well, coping is, well, if you go to any bookstore, National, fully booked, go to the self-help section, you will see row upon row of books with the word coping in the title. Coping with financial loss, coping with aging, coping with stress. And we think to ourselves, yeah, coping is the way to go. Well, coping is doing some positive things in response to an adversity, but it's also doing some not so positive things. So we would call that sort of the middle ground, or a thumb sideways, if you will. Now we get to the good stuff. Managing an adversity. Managing an adversity is looking at the situation and saying, all right, we're suffering from this pandemic. We're suffering from the quarantine and the actions and the choices of our government. What are the downsides and how do we minimize this? It's basically putting out the fire. Or if a dam springs a leak, it's putting your finger in the hole. That's a thumbs up, but it's still not the best possible response. The highest response on our continuum is called harnessing. It's not just looking at the downside and how do we minimize that. It's also trying to find the upside. And going to your story, Andre, it's maximizing this time that we have in this period of disruption and saying, all right, well, I guess we'll just have to work from home or just make do or cope or minimize the downside. It's saying, what can we do to maximize, consume, use this opportunity to help fuel our goals and to help us achieve what it is we want to achieve. So harnessing would absolutely be the best possible response.
I think that no further questions, Your Honor.
Very good. And thank you for that, Andre.
Thank you, James.
Thanks for that, James. We
Thanks,
can now
James.
give the floor to our friends and to our colleagues over here. If you have questions, please do type me at the comment section or at the chat box. Or you may just unmute your mic and you may introduce yourself and ask a question to James.
Floor is open.
Charlene Wang, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm thinking now that it's probably not too late to start learning how to be gritty, but I just want to know how leaders can promote a culture of grit, especially now that we're working from home.
Okay, great. Fantastic question. Well, there's a lot of possible answers, and at the risk of sounding like I'm cross-selling or upselling, we offer a variety of programs to address that specific concern. We've also had to make some adjustments because most of the trainings that I conduct are live, classroom type, me in front of a group of people. Now, with the situation, we are currently developing a webinar version of our program that we'll be offering in the very, very near future. For everyone listening right now, if you want, you can contact me via email and let me know if you're interested in participating in this webinar series that we'll be launching probably as early as next week to address that specific concern.
We also have a shopping cart. You can put that out. Thanks for that question, Charlene.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Ina. My question is, I'm just curious, among the four in the GRIT, is there something that is more important than the other, or they're all
Okay.
important?
Yeah, that's a good question, and let me give you a cheap answer. They're all four equally important. However, here's my caveat. We use our assessments, the AQ and the GRIT assessment, to determine hireability of a candidate. Now, although all 8 dimensions, CORE for AQ and GRIT for GRIT, are all equally important, it really depends on the role that you're hiring for. For example, if we were hiring for, let's say, a sales director, when it comes to GRIT, GRIT, of those 4 dimensions, which one do we need to raise the bar on? And for us, it would have to be both resilience and tenacity. Because in sales, as you can imagine, the kinds of adversities they experience, rejection, looming revenue targets that seem way, way out of reach, which challenges their tenacity, doors slamming in their face, people backing out of deals last minute. Those are all adversities or are. So if we were hiring for a sales director, we would look for higher scores in R and T. Whereas if we were hiring, let's say, for an HR specialist, well, now growth and instinct seem to be more relevant for that particular position. So it is, I guess, a case-to-case basis, depending on the role the person is hoping to play. But all 4, or in the case of AQ, all 8 dimensions are pretty important.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I have a question, Dandy.
Yes, Dandy.
Hi, you mentioned earlier that there are different modes that people undergo when they face certain situations. For example, like whether they're in survival mode, they're in harnessing mode, whatsoever. How do you step up that ladder, though? I mean, for example, I am in survival mode now, and that's really all I can care about. I mean, I can't care about harnessing, but what do you think could help me to reach that level?
Fantastic. And I'm really glad you asked that, Dandy. So let's talk about that continuum once again, those 5 stages. Let me just give you the short form of the activity that we normally do in our workshop. First, try to discover, where do you exist on this continuum? And from what I'm hearing from Dandy, it's very good that you are self-aware that you're on the surviving ladder or rung of the ladder. So question number 1 is what can you do differently to move yourself up just 1 position on that continuum? Now, if you notice the wording of that question, I didn't say, how can you go from surviving to harnessing or surviving to even managing? You have to do things in increments. Remember, when you're promoting your AQ and GRIT, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like a bottle rocket. You just, and then you've achieved it. You have to be reasonable. You have to understand that this is a journey. Now, not to take too much time, but let me give you another tip, something that I actually do. I keep a daily journal beside my bed. Before I go to bed at night, I document all the adversities I experienced that day, small, medium, and critical. And then beside each of those adversities, I give a number, 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, 1 avoiding, 5 harnessing. And I do this every day. And at the end of the week, I go back to my journal and I compare what kinds of adversities am I giving 1s and 2s? What other kinds of adversities am I giving 4s and 5s? And then I ask this question: what am I doing differently for those 4s and 5s that I'm not doing when it comes to those 1s and 2s? And slowly but surely, I discover, maybe I should be trying this instead of that when this adversity happens. So give it a try. It's not easy. It does take work, effort, but trust me, it will pay off.
That's great. That's great advice. Thank you.
You bet.
James?
I think we have a phone-in question.
Great. Sure.
I have a question, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
In what specific situations, especially now in the current work from home setup, that grit and EQ mindset can be applied? Because when you explained it, it kind of seemed still like a mindset, it's kind of like vague for me. So I want to have a practical example of where can we use this.
Okay, very good. Well, let's narrow the scope of the questions down to when you work from home. Do you consider this an adversity, or do you consider it an opportunity? And once you've answered that question, and there's no shame in answering either way, but if you say, well, God, working from home, man, this is really a headache, man, this is really a big disruption to what I do. Well, now it falls into the adversity category. And there are several questions that you can ask, and if you consider the situation to be an adversity. Number one, what are the facets of this situation, this whole working from home? What are the facets that I can at least potentially influence in order to remain productive? And number two, how can I step up to make the most immediate positive difference when it comes to this situation? There are more questions, but let's just focus on those two. Now, on the other side of the coin, some people might say, yeah, work from home, awesome. I want to prove to my management, to my boss, that I can be just as, if not more productive, and to my clients under these circumstances. Well, if you think of the situation like that, well, then working from home and your productivity becomes a goal. And now you're dealing with GRIT. And here, I think the most important question, and again, this is something I mentioned earlier, is the growth question. What tools and resources do I need to perform my duties at home better? What questions must be answered, and where do I go to get those answers? And of course, the instinct one. Considering that now my context has changed, I'm no longer in the office, I can no longer go out into the field and meet clients face to face. What can I do to reassess, reroute, and choose a more optimal path in order to achieve my goals while I am indeed working from home?
All right. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, Sarah.
We have a question over here coming from NB. NB, would you like to speak up, or would you like me to go ahead? Okay. It says most companies now, big and small, are... Yeah, go ahead, NB.
Hi,
Hi, NB.
it's Ninfa. Hi, James. Yes, from a company point of view, everyone's in crisis mode, correct? And you're trying to basically offer a workshop that would normally be very, very useful uh, during normal times. It's a workshop. It's basically upskilling your workforce, getting them to basically look at things differently. But at this time, when people are just trying to get by, companies small are just basically trying to figure out how they're going to get revenues coming in. Is this the right time to basically try to offer this to them? Number one. Number two, what is the cost of the companies at this point? And is this a cost that would be considered for them essential?
Okay, good. Yeah. Question number one. Yeah, we are currently restructuring our program to offer it in a webinar format, much like what we're doing today, so that we can reach our clients with the concepts that they need. Likewise, our assessments are also online, so that in no way is being affected by a whole work from home context. The cost, there are multiple options. There are, of course, free options that you can do in order to expose yourself to AQ and Grit through, self-learning, going online, checking out our website, plug Peak Learning, checking out videos, YouTube, web, TED Talks by Dr. Stoltz, by Dr. Stephen Thompson, all of which you can also access through our website. All of this, of course, is free. However, if you want to really go deeper, to really extend AQ and Grit into your organization, like I said, we can talk offline about this, and I can present to you some options when it comes to the programs that we're currently developing, so that we can maintain these connections with our clients. Because as you can imagine, and what was mentioned earlier, many of our current clients are reaching out to us saying, hey, what are we going to do? I had dozens of workshops being postponed right now or pushed further into the year, which has greatly disrupted our curriculum for these clients, our projects. So we're using this time to restructure, reformat, repackage the way we offer our program. So yes, let's talk offline, and I can give you some more, I guess, precise examples of programs that you and your organization can avail of.
Thanks.
We do have a question from Tito Pavia in Facebook Watch Party. He says, in as much as Grit enjoins us to be proactive with our challenges, what are some more introspective or mindfulness-oriented ways in which we can recharge and reflect on our actions so as to avoid burnout? All
right. Well, that falls squarely in the realm of tenacity. A question that I often ask my participants is, and we can all play this game together. If you were to close your eyes right now and think about what was your single proudest moment in your entire life? What has been your single biggest achievement ever? Take a moment and think about that. For some people, it might be finishing the university, getting your degree, your diploma. Your parents were over there looking so proud, throwing your hat in the air with your classmates. For someone like myself, a former athlete, maybe it was winning a tournament or a competition and getting a trophy or a medal. Maybe it was holding your first newborn baby in the hospital. Now, everyone at this moment should be thinking, what was that thing, that biggest accomplishment, achievement you've ever done? Now, let me ask you 3 questions, and you don't have to answer me out loud. Did those moments, or did that moment, did it require sacrifice? Did it require struggle? Did it require suffering at some level? Well, I'm willing to bet that the answer to all 3 questions is yes, yes, and oh yes. Now, what does that tell us? Well, it's quite simple. These moments that we cherish most, these memories that we will carry to our graves, are forged in those 3 S's: sacrifice, struggle, and suffering. So in this time of crisis, this pandemic, we are feeling those S's to varying degrees. It's all about perspective. Remember, as we not just get through this, but as we work toward maximizing this opportunity. When we come out the other side, which of course will not last forever, what do we want life to look like? What do we want ourselves to look like? What kind of memories are being forged right now in this moment that 15 or 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, hey, if it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't be this person that I am today. So again, I guess to wrap up my answer, my long answer to your short question is, what kind of mindset do you have now? And what kind of mindset could you possess beyond this adversity?
James? Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
One more?
Sure.
Yeah, so the three S's, right? Sacrifice, struggle, and social distancing, right?
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. Perfect.
Here, we're socially distanced. They're back there. I'm up here. Just a public service reminder to everybody.
Yeah.
Now, my question, well, in the same vein of sacrifice, struggle, and suffering, right?
Yeah.
And our whole tackling of the methodology of grit. It seems to me that the conversation in the past hour has revolved around the essence of how. How do you practice grit? What's the methodology, right? It seems to me that for such a powerful way of life, a way of attacking life, if you will, that there needs to be a more fundamental question being asked than how, which is why.
Correct.
I mean, I don't have much exposure to the framework of grit, other than I know it's a subject of a TED Talk that basically did a study of, what is the single most important determinant of success. And of course, it is your subject matter. It's grit, right? I mean, across the board, grit.
Yep.
It begs the question, though, what makes people gritty, right?
Yep.
I mean, going back to the very vivid example that I shared with you about my team, right? To move heaven and earth and mountains and to practice those instincts and tenacity, we must have cared, right?
Yep.
If we don't care, grit only kicks in, and the methodologies of grit only kick in if there's a very big, powerful why fueling it, right?
Yep,
because
correct.
I don't care how much you study the framework of grit. If you, for example, tell me, study ballet, Andre, and here's grit, well, I'm not going to get gritty about it because I don't care, right?
That's right.
So can you make this connection between, it's fine, right? Because for every one person or team you can tell me who went through your methodology in order to become gritty, we could probably talk about 10 more examples who never went through a framework, right? But what they had was a why. They were on fire about something and nothing was going to stop them. So can you tell us a little bit about the why?
Absolutely. And now we did not invent this principle, but you may have heard this. If you want action, meaningful action toward anything, first you got to move a person's heart. Once they see what is the why, what is the purpose, what's in it for me? Why should I even bother? You have to get their hearts before you move their minds, before you get them thinking about the process, the concepts of grid and understanding what GRIT means. You got to move the heart before you move the mind. And then once the mind starts moving, then you start moving the hands. You start putting these thoughts, ideas, concepts into action. And then the final, of course, is the harvest. It's reaping the rewards of those actions. So it's a very simple four-step process. But to reinforce your point, Andre, you got to start with the why. Now, we don't have time, I think, but let me offer this to everyone listening. We have a free app. If you go to your app store on your mobile device and you type in the word grit, now there'll be several options there. Look for our logo or our title, Peak Learning. We have a logo. It looks like a muddy boot print. There's also another version of the app that has a mountain climber on it. Download that app, open it up, and go to a tool. It's called the Why Try. And that is a very simple but compelling tool that allows you to establish goals, to prioritize them, to determine how much effort you're putting into each goal, and how much purpose does each goal have. And as you do this, some of your numbers, your why and your try will align. That's great. But in other cases, you'll see a gap skewed one way or another. And in that same app, there are a series of questions that you'll have to answer in order to close those gaps or to maintain the why and, of course, the try effort toward those particular goals.
Perfect.
You bet.
Thank you. Drax and Carla, turning it back to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, James. Yeah. Go ahead, Rex.
go ahead, Carlo.
Yes. Well, as wonderful as the discussion has been, I think it's time to wrap it up. So before we say goodbyes, James, would you like to say anything before you go? Anything you want to announce? To connect to your audience.
Yeah, well, let me invite everyone not just to visit two websites. Visit our Peak Learning website if you'd like to know more about AQ and Grit or today's topics. Two, you can also visit my company's website, Viventis Search Asia, and you can of course reach out to me directly at jhargrove@viventis-search.com. I guess we'll post that so you guys can see it. If you want to talk offline about anything we spoke about today, if you want to ask me more specific questions, or if you want to know more about our programs, please reach out. We're always here. I'm excited to help in any way that I can. So yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Drax.
Thanks so much. Just to wrap things up, I would like to say thank you so much for your time today. I do have a shameless plug-in, actually. This is for our next series of events, but this will happen virtually for sure. We do have something that's called 100 Hours Leadership in a Time of Corona. And we do have Tuesday and Thursdays run of our 100-hour launch pad. This is a tool that if you're a manager and if you're managing a team, you can use this tool in order to move your project forward or to move an idea forward. So this will happen tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays, but tomorrow Andre and Miguel Arenas will be hosting that show. We would love for you guys to be there. I can see lots of friends over here who are leaders from their own organizations. So yeah, looking forward to have you guys there. Also, we are doing a wellness program every month, every day. So this past few days, we have done a 30-minute soul pad with Joanna Alberto. She's also from Ignite House under Ignite Center for Peak Experiences. So that's also very, very useful for you guys, for all of us. So tomorrow we do have two shows in the morning at 8 a.m. and at 10:30 a.m. Andre, last few words for you.
I want to give a giant thanks to James Hargrove. Wonderful. Is it Army?
You bet.
Marine?
My pleasure.
Yeah, and of course to our friends in Viventis, whom you represent, have represented very proudly today. Grit is a wonderful thing, and I think you ended it on the exact note. Over the next couple of days, weeks, we're gonna hear a lot online about this and that methodology. I think the most important thing for all of us is to find our why. At a time like this, is to find our why. Our why will propel us towards service, towards mission. And if you're oriented that way, you will have grit.
Absolutely.
That's what I want to say. So thank you, James. Enjoy the rest of your birds chirping. And yes, including social distancing. To the rest of us, the programs that Grax had just run through. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then every morning at 8 this is again part of the launches that we did in rapid succession. We've launched 4 programs already. One of the programs is called 30-Day Growth Pad. And 30-Day Growth Pad, as you can imagine, is every day. We are not going to allow people to just sulk as we're all locked down. We're going to give experiences such as what James did. Either we give it ourselves, or we ourselves in Ignite, or we find somebody like James who can offer their expertise, their insight, so that our 30 days, or if it turns out to be 60 days or 90 days, who knows, can be a growth platform for us, a growth and transformation platform for us. So it really has been that kind of 60 minutes with you, James. Wonderful. Thanks again. Our best regards to you, Ming, team. So have a good afternoon, the rest of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Take care.